Hey you, you're listening to the Intentional Documentary Podcast. So glad to have you. Around here, I'm gushing over the stories behind the pictures that we freaking love of our own lives. You know, the ones we hold as high value and iconic, because this is where photography meets real life. I'm your host, Marie Moss, and I believe that the best way to approach your photography is through your lens, your way. Through insightful conversations with photographers, I'll explore preserving life with your camera and using what lights you up to grow your brand. Let's get started. Woo! If you're listening to this, that means I actually hit the freaking publish button. I have started and stopped this podcast about 3 different times. It hasn't even made it to the publish button yet because I keep holding myself back. I have put so much pressure on myself in making it perfect for you. I want you to be absolutely mind blown by these first few episodes that it's literally paralyzed my action. So here we are 8 months later after starting this journey and we're here. We've arrived to the publish button and I couldn't be more thrilled. I just want to take a few minutes here to tell you a little bit about what I have in mind right now for this podcast, which can always change, and a little bit about myself so you know who you're listening to. So, gosh, I picked up my camera first in 2011 when my daughter was born. I'm sure you might be like, yep, me too. It was right when my kids were born. Or you're like, oh, one of those people who became a photographer when they had kids. So I didn't jump into a photography business right away. I just wanted to learn how to use my camera and was so obsessed with it that I was reading every blog post, just joining everything possible to continue to learn and to grow. In 2012, I had a first mentor session and that just exploded my growth even more. And shortly around that time, actually, I think it was actually before the mentor session, I took a few friends out just to see if I had what it takes to be a photographer. But what happened, and I don't know where I created this limiting belief along the way, but what I was doing for clients was totally different than what I was doing in my own life. And I went down this path of photography that was just totally not me, doing what I felt I had to do to please clients, and ended up a couple years in stopping what I was doing to pursue documentary photography. There was nobody else out there doing what I was doing that I knew of at the time in 2013. And I guess that what really just stuck out at me was that the pictures I was making for myself, they weren't necessarily these mind-blowing, well-lit, technically perfect, elicits a very strong emotion out of other people type of an image. They were really simple pictures with big backstories. And when I started to identify that, I was like, I want clients to experience photography the way that I experience photography, and I didn't know how to do that. Have you ever been like that in your journey where you're seeing like what you're doing for clients is totally different than what you're doing and you want to do more of what you're doing for you for other people, but there's like some sort of a disconnect? Because that's exactly where I was at. And long story short, I'm sure we'll get into this in a later episode, but I started to figure that out. I took the steps, just one step at a time, to figure that out. And now here we are a few years later, and I host the Fearless and Framed blog, community, website, whatever you want to call it, which is a place for photographers to help themselves first, but then also for their clients, tell real stories in their life with their camera. So not just, and I don't mean to say just as in a demeaning type of a way, but more than only everyday moments, more than the stereotypes that we're starting to see in documentary family photography with really funny, humorous stuff. Or sometimes it feels like the messier, the better, or the more bare-bottomed, the better. And even like that, to me, there's nothing wrong with any of that, like if that's what really lights you up. But for me, what really lights me up is having a picture that takes me back to a certain place, to a certain experience, or to feel the relationship that I have with a certain person, that something that really identifies a characteristic or a trait about a person that I love. Like, I want to feel those things, like so intimate and so purposeful with that picture. And that, I don't know, that's intentional documentary to me in a nutshell. And I want to explore that more with you, with our guests, with myself, what that looks like, how to put that into a business with clients. I don't want this to be a super businessy podcast because there's a dime a dozen of those, but I really want to talk about that connection where photography meets real life. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. Hopefully that gives you a small umbrella of what this is about. Speaking of umbrellas, that's kind of what started this, is I started to recognize that documentary family photography is this big umbrella. And through my program that I run, Mastery Moment Seekers, when I started working with my students, I started to really see the individuality in each photographer. Even though we were all shooting documentary family photography, I started to see how their experiences in life and their perspective really molded who they are as a strong photographer. And when I started to see that, I really wanted to amplify that. Like, if we were all looking at the same scene, like if there was 5 of us in a row and we're looking at a very busy scene, we would all see that scene differently. And even if a couple of us were overlapping and seeing the same thing happening, we would shoot it differently because our perspective is just different. And I'm so excited to explore that with you guys, because if you can start to identify why you see the way that you see and how you see to begin with, your work can truly explode, and whatever that, whatever explode means to you, whether that's like just becoming better technically because you can anticipate things better, or it becomes more intimate to you, whatever that may look like, that path might look like for you. But then also you can carry over that uniqueness into the way that you speak in your brand, which is huge and what is totally lacking with a lot of photographers, because we've pursued photography and not necessarily business, and you are a personal brand, so it all kind of blends together. Anyway, I could totally ramble on about all this stuff, but I'm just going to stop talking and get this out to you so that we can get to the real meat and potatoes of the Intentional Documentary podcast. Thank you to our podcast team for making the Intentional Documentary podcast possible. Our sound editor, Lucy Burgess, Minimag designer, Jillian Adriana, and our show notes manager, Ebony Rivera. Special thank you to our episode guests for openly sharing their insight. And thank you for listening, of course. Please hit the review tab to leave a rating. I'd love to read about your favorite episodes and what has really clicked for you. And remember, the only way to approach your photography is through your lens, your way. Photograph freely, and I'll see you next time. Visit fearlessandframed.com/intentional documentary podcast for this episode and all past episodes, show notes, and mini mags.